Okay, it's Monday morning and it's time for another episode of Existential Ambiguity.
AKA cup of tea.
Have a cup of tea, Ronnie. I didn't say shout a cup of tea. Anyway, we're here again with more of Weti Muni's great book, Buddha's Teaching and the Ambiguity of Existence. Well, what's so great about this book, anyway?
It talks about the Buddha's teaching in the language of existentialism. So maybe some intellectuals from the West can actually understand what the Buddha was trying to get at here.
Well, not everybody is an intellectual, but almost everybody is an existentialist, whether they know it or not.
Well, they're like half-assed existentialists. They're like culture.
Half-past existentialism.
They've been immersed in it through the culture, but the culture is full of all other kinds of crap as well.
Well, a lot of the viewpoints of the existential philosophers, a lot of their conclusions, have become so deeply embedded in Western culture that at this point, for all practical purposes, everybody in the West is an existentialist. And that means almost everybody in the world, because Western culture has spread all over the place. I mean, you got 12-year-old boys in India playing heavy metal music on guitars.
Even in Myanmar, I saw.
Yeah, I saw a video of it. So,
at least, if they're not like a conscious existentialist, they're much more of a skeptic than they were.
Well, skepticism is intrinsic to existentialism.
It's a varying degree of how far they take their skepticism.
Yeah, but death metal is pretty skeptical. We're all gonna die.
Yeah.
Megadeth.
Skeptical to everything except death metal.
Right.
Yeah.
Death metal's great.
And everything related to it is also great.
Everything else is terrible.
Yeah. And it's
useless.
Like that with all groups that we identify with.
But, identification doesn't mean that we have to reject everything that's not what we identify with.
No. But I think we should be skeptical even to the things we identify with. That's
a good idea. What about being skeptical towards skepticism? Now, that's the ultimate.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah. Because the ultimate in skepticism is to say that nothing is real, that the world as we experience it does not exist.
Yeah, you even doubt your own senses.
Or doubt your own existence. Even I don't exist. Even myself doesn't exist.
Well, that happens to be the right conclusion, but...
It happens to be the right conclusion, but for the wrong reason.
Yeah,
okay.
and with no actionable way of getting there to the realization.
Right. So you have lots of, college students with one semester of philosophy going around spouting this stuff.
I'm nothing.
And movies being made about it, like The Matrix. But actually, very few people realize these truths. Mostly they just talk about them.
They pay lip service and then they go on with their Ājñā making.
Yeah. What we're here to tell you is that there really is no self in the sense of a permanent identity or ego or I. There is no mind. So there is no consciousness, no experience, no feelings, no pleasure or pain, so on and so forth. No mind, etc., etc. But what do these things actually mean in terms of experience? It doesn't mean that, therefore we just go out and take so much intoxication that we can't see straight. That's not a solution.
That's a shortcut to eradicating or changing the self and getting an experience of no self.
And
but
it's also
always
temporary.
Yeah, it's temporary and it's always something less than the realization of it.
And it's also accompanied by lots of suffering.
Side effects and whatnot.
Yeah, now, if we were to really realize no self, we would be relieved from all of our suffering permanently.
Yes.
That's what the Buddha offers. But the Buddha also says that on the way to get there, we have to give up these things like heavy metal music and drugs and sex and all these nonsense things that have become also embedded in the culture and connected with these ideas. That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's why people can't move from the default Western philosophy, existential nihilism, to actual realization of no self.
Because they're drowning in sense enjoyment, which is the gross type of craving.
And they think, even the ones that are so-called hip, think the only way out of that is death, usually by suicide. So you have Kurt Cobain, and did you see that movie Harold and Maude?
No, I've heard the name. But...
Back in the 60s, there was this real hip movie about this old lady, 80-year-old lady, who had hung out in Tibet and supposedly realized something or other. And she lived in an abandoned railway car, and, you know, it was
like a beatnik.
Yeah, really, a real hippie, you know. This is before there were long-haired hippie-type people. Yeah, beatnik. And this young fella runs into her at a funeral. That was his hobby. He went to funerals.
Ah, I've heard the story.
He even made a car, a custom sports car with the back like a hearse. You know. Yeah. So they start hanging out together and so on and so forth. And then at the end, on her 80th birthday, she commits suicide. And I guess that's a reference to the Buddha, because the Buddha was born, attained enlightenment, and died on the same day, 80 years later, exactly. Died on his 80th birthday. That's all well and good as a hip reference to the Buddha, but to portray suicide as the end or the realization, it's just really phony.
Yeah, it's actually clinging to non-being.
Right. Exactly. And clinging to non-being is just going to get you born again in another body and have to go through the same crap all over again. Any kind of clinging, doesn't matter what it is going to have suffering as a result, because clinging is one of the things that conditions suffering. We'll get into that when we go through Paticca Samuppada. Right now, we're just really trying to clear up our language so that we can describe these things adequately.
We're practicing talking through it from start to finish.
Right.
And zooming in on all the different parts. And we're learning the shop talk while holding the podcast.
Yes, that's exactly what we're doing.
So we might make mistakes, and feel free to comment on...
Nobody dares comment on our podcasts. Not one comment so far, even though this is the 18th or 19th episode or something. And I can't understand why, because there's plenty of stuff you could comment on. But anyway.
Maybe they're afraid to make mistakes.
Mistakes?
Maybe we will would trample themselves.
Oh dear. Oh my goodness, we might make them feel like they got something wrong or something. Well, we get stuff wrong all the time, so make sure and tell us about it and we'll fix it. So anyway, we've been talking about feeling. Pleasant and unpleasant, pleasurable and displeasurable.
Bodily and mental.
Right. So the classification of feelings we've gone through so far is that feeling, Vedana in Pali, is basically divided into Kayika, or bodily feeling, and Cetasika, or mental feeling. And each of those is divided into pleasant, Sukha, unpleasant, Dukkha, and neutral, Adukkama Sukha. So we have a graphic in the post that illustrates this.
In the graphics we use the same for bodily and mental, pleasant, unpleasant. We decided...
Actually, mental, it should be called pleasurable and displeasurable. I don't know the Pali equivalents for that. We'd have to look that up.
Well, it would be Kaika Dukkha or Cetasika Dukkha.
Oh, we discussed that yesterday. Yeah, we'd have to go back to that and look that up. Vaiti Muni continues. Now let us clarify the distinction between feeling and perception. Though it's not a difficult distinction, sometimes it's not seen clearly enough. When I experience taste in my tongue, that is just perceiving a taste, which may be bitter, sweet, etc. But simultaneously, I can experience a feeling in the tongue because the tongue is a bodily phenomenon. And there's a note here. In this context, the term bodily, kayika, includes the entire body. But when we speak of the 6 sense bases, the body is said to be one of them. Then we do not include the parts of the body such as the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and brain, mind, in the sense base referred to as the body. In other words, when they talk about the body, it means touch.
Touch.
The sensation of touch and the perceptions derived from touch.
They include touching of the organ that can perform that other sense. So you can have a headache, which is bodily touch, right?
But you talked about this yesterday in the distinction between touch and analogs such as kinesthesia. Kinesthesia, or the sense of bodily motion, is based on touch, but it's a consideration or an analog or a computation based on touch that gives you a situational awareness of how the body is moving.
Yeah.
The posture, the lean, the angle, the movement of the limbs, the pressure on the various sense organs, and so on.
And really, in a sense, hearing is a form of touch because it's reverberation of a...
Eardrum?
Everything is touch in a sense, but it's abstracted or interpreted by the organ in a different way.
Well, that's what he's getting at here, the difference between feeling and perception. A feeling is similar to immediate experience, and a perception is similar to reflexive, with an X, experience, where there's some processing going on. For example, when I have a feeling of a taste in the tongue, it's just a feeling. But then when I go and analyze it and I say it's bitter, it's sweet, it's hot, it's this, it's that, the quality of that, that's perception. I've added a little information or derived some information from the raw sense data and identified or recognized a particular taste. Oh, that's the taste of vanilla ice cream.
That's a perception.
That's a perception. Whereas the raw sensation of it is this cool kind of creamy thing, and it has a sort of sweet taste with the little overtones of some herb or something.
If it's very hot, it could be painful.
Whether I like vanilla or don't like vanilla ice cream.
That's even another layer of abstraction.
Yes.
That's mental.
That's feeling. That's Vedana.
But that's mental Vedana.
Yes.
Whether you like it or not.
Right. Because who can say, for example, that the taste or the sensation of eating ice cream is unpleasant unless you eat too much of it or something like that.
Yeah,
or
and
it's
if you
too cold.
eat hot chili, it can be painful in the mouth, but you can get a pleasant sensation in the mind.
Yes. So Weti Muni describes this. He says, thus, when I drink a cup of very hot tea, I experience a pleasant sweet taste along with an unpleasant burning feeling in my tongue. This unpleasant feeling is a bodily feeling because the tongue is a bodily phenomenon. But the pleasant sweet taste is something derived from that. So there can actually be pleasure and displeasure going on at the very same time.
But one is stronger than the other and takes center stage, and the other one goes on in the background.
Usually, yeah.
So if it's too hot, then you forget about how sweet it is, and if it's not just a little bit hot, then you can still enjoy the sweetness.
Likewise, when I experience a touch on my arm, that is just perceiving a touch with the sense base of body. But along with it, I can have a pleasant feeling in that part of the body, and this pleasant feeling is a bodily feeling, again, because the arm is a bodily phenomenon, unless it happens to be a cobra crawling on your arm. It might actually feel pleasant. You know, a nice, cool snake crawling on your arm. Yeah. And then you look at it.
You thought it was your girlfriend stroking you until somebody was.
So pleasant and displeasurable feelings can coexist at the same time about the same thing, the very same experience. Very interesting. Then he goes on to say, with the sense-based mind, the relation would be as follows. When I think of eating a tasty dish, there is a mental image perception. But along with it, there is also feeling happy about it, and this feeling happy is a pleasant mental feeling.
You would say pleasurable?
I think pleasurable is really what he's trying to say here, because happiness is a mental phenomenon. So he introduced his terminology and then immediately breaks it. Of course, mental feeling is not limited to mental image perception. We have mental feelings when we experience other percepts and bodily feelings as well. So, okay, he's trying to make the distinction here between feelings and perceptions with mixed results. So just to clear up all the confusion, we could say that a sensation is a base or direct or immediate experience.
You can say a sensation is a bodily feeling.
Okay, that sounds good. But a mental feeling about that feeling is a higher degree. It's awareness.
It's our interpretation of it.
Yes, right.
But they're both called Vedana.
They're both called feeling because one is in the body and one is in the mind. Yet the very same experience can cause two different types of feeling simultaneously, one in the body and one in the mind.
And the one that we are concerned about removing is the unpleasurable feeling in the mind.
That's dukkha, in the way that the Buddha describes it, the third definition of dukkha.
The one we want to remove, because then all the other ones become irrelevant also.
That's right. The type of suffering that's due to mental fabrications is the most pernicious and the most difficult kind of suffering to remove because it's self-caused.
Yeah.
By creating I and mine, we set ourselves up for suffering. We condition ourselves for suffering.
And there doesn't even have to be an unpleasurable sense object there. You can imagine stuff and have intense suffering.
Or if something changes over time, that's also suffering. The body, for example, we identify with the body, we call it mine or even I, and then when the body changes, as it's going to do, we suffer.
Yeah.
We suffer not only physically, but mentally. And the mental suffering is far worse than the physical suffering.
Yeah. And we worry about stuff changing in the future, like a bill coming due or something can go wrong with one of my possessions.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't even have to happen, but you can still have a lot of suffering going on. Just the anticipation of something changing.
Yes. So he goes on. One should always remember that the Buddha's teaching is designed to lead us on to the utter cessation of the feelings classified as mentally unpleasant. Cetasika dukkha vedana, such as anxiety, worry, fear, despair, agitation, sorrow, doubt, etc.
Lamentation, anger. Anger is a nice one.
These unpleasant mental feelings as a whole can be called displeasure. In the suttas, this displeasure is called dukkha. It is one of the three contexts where the word dukkha is used. We went over this yesterday. In the second context, dukkha is used as an adjective to describe feeling, dukkha vedana. And dukkha here means merely unpleasant or painful. So it can refer to either bodily or mental feeling. In the third context, dukkha is used in the Four Noble Truths. Dukkha, the arising of dukkha, the ceasing of dukkha, and the path to the ceasing of dukkha. It is to understand dukkha in this context that all our effort is necessary. Because why? Understanding the Four Noble Truths is the key to getting the benefit of the Buddha's teaching. And the benefit, of course, is freedom, or actually he describes it as immunity from dukkha. It's more than just freedom, because freedom can be lost. But it's permanent cessation of dukkha, or immunity from the disease of suffering. Even though everyone in this world is suffering in different ways, by cultivating these Four Noble Truths, we can get a permanent release from suffering. That's not available anywhere else that I know of, including the most sophisticated Eastern philosophies such as the Vedas and like that, Vedanta and so forth. So provisionally we have rendered dukkha in this third context of the Four Noble Truths as suffering or displeasurableness. I think you could just say displeasure. We will deal with this point fully later on.
It's also sometimes translated as stress by Thanissaro Bhikkhu.
Thanissaro likes stress.
And another way of explaining it, dukkha is like a disturbance in the mind.
Agitation.
Well,
that's one kind of dukkha. Stress is another kind of dukkha. But I like displeasure because displeasure is on a higher level than either suffering or stress. Displeasure is an aesthetic thing. We don't like the idea of our body growing old and dying, even if it's not happening. When we worry, we're worried about an idea.
Yes.
That's all that's present at the moment, is the idea that, oh, my body's going to grow old.
A disturbance in the mind, really. And if you don't have any disturbance in the mind is cool and clear, and that is actually nibbana.
Neither liking nor disliking anything. Neither attraction or repulsion to anything. Neither desire nor aversion to anything. The neutral state. So, to go on, when the suttas refer to feeling, without making the distinction between bodily and mental, they usually refer to mental feeling for two reasons. The Buddha's teaching aims at completely destroying the possibility of unpleasant mental feeling, displeasurable actually. And when the subject identifies with feeling, subject means I, it is usually not so much with bodily feeling as with mental feeling. Our identification with the mind is even stronger than our identification with the body. Because when the body is finished, the mind goes on, carries us to the next body. In fact, this process of the mind connecting with or even beginning to create the next body begins while we're still alive. When a person is in old age and the body begins to fail and there's so many things they can't do anymore that they would like to do, I know this from personal experience. Desires begin to arise like, oh, I wish I had a nice young body so I could do X, whatever it is. So the desire to have a new body, a young, refreshed, better, of course, usually you think you want a better looking or a better birth or something like that. This desire begins to arise as soon as the present body starts to wind down. Which it's going to do.
That's like setting yourself up for... and everyone does it.
Everyone. You can't help it. Because you're used to certain things. You have habits of certain things, certain ways of eating, certain ways of moving, certain other activities that you do as a matter of habit. And then if you can't do that anymore...
You're going to wish for another body.
Yes.
And as long as you haven't contacted the Buddha's teaching, you don't have any other choice than to think those thoughts.
That's right. The putujana, the unschooled or uninstructed, ordinary, run-of-the-mill person, is drawn by the mind. He is run by his mind. Because he has not distinguished his mind from himself. He has not seen that the mind is a machine that just runs programs like a computer. And at the moment it's filled with malware. It's filled with viruses. And these viruses are using the majority of the processing power of the mind. And they are leading him like by the nose into all kinds of suffering. He doesn't see this. He thinks, oh, I have my job and my wardrobe and my relationship and my car. And
this is just who I am.
Stuff, and this is who I am. Exactly.
I can't help myself.
No, everybody's got to have that stuff, right? Well, no.
Everybody thinks like that.
No, not everybody.
But all putujanas operate like that.
They operate like they can't help it. They've been conditioned. We've all been conditioned since birth. Birth is the first great trauma, unless someone has intrauterine trauma, which is also an issue that comes up in therapy if you go deep enough. That there is a difference, a distinction between I, myself, and others. That is the content of the primary trauma, the birth trauma, the separation from the mother. Physical separation from the mother. This is laid down in the mind at a very, very deep level, and it affects all our thoughts, all of our feelings, all of our actions, all of our perceptions, all of our considerations, all of our determinations and fabrications. They are all based on that fundamental idea of I as a separate being, an individual. Well, there is something to being an individual. But when it becomes unconscious, habitual, multiplies among all the thoughts in the mind and infects them all, then you have a problem.
Yes.
Because now it's not conscious, it's not deliberate. It's something you're doing as a matter of habit.
Yes.
And, most of all, it conditions us for suffering. Because I and mine are the two most pernicious illusions in our thinking, in our existence. And it underlies our consciousness, I used to think that consciousness was fundamental. But since taking up the Buddha's teaching, I can see that consciousness is also derivative. It's derivative of this ignorance of I and mine, plus the senses and sense objects that we are basing I and mine on. So when these things come together and then we identify with them, we are led down the garden path. Because as soon as these things change, if we can't get the kind of food we want, if we can't get the kind of accommodations we want, or if our car breaks down, or if something happens to our house, or heaven forbid to our relationship, or anything else that we're attached to, we suffer. So we will suffer as long as we consider these things I and mine. It's guaranteed. It's unavoidable. And the only way around it is to remove, to uproot, as the Buddha says, those thoughts of I and mine.
Yes. And we experience this.
Oh, every day.
We still have malware and viruses in our system, but we're aware that they're just fabrications.
Yes.
So
we don't take them as seriously
No.
as the Pratujana.
Sometimes it can like jump on you and you're not aware of it, and then you catch yourself later being run by it. But it's actionable, you have a handle on it. If you just load the recollected mind and load the ontology, then you can handle it very nicely.
Yeah. If you have the Buddha's teaching. If you don't have the Buddha's teaching, or if you have a distorted copy of the Buddha's teaching, then you can't do that.
No.
You'll be stuck with it. This is the condition that most people find themselves in. If you don't distinguish something, that means make a difference between this thing and that thing.
It runs you.
It runs you. You can't even perceive it.
No.
It's coming in subliminally.
And this is how mind control works also.
Yes. And the powers that be are very, very well aware of this.
They've refined this method.
Oh, yeah.
And one way is through trauma. Like you said, with birth, they induce trauma in their patients. That's when they have one particular
circumcision.
Circumcision, wow.
Huh?
Talk about trauma.
Oh, yeah. This is deliberate.
Huh.
Why do you think they do this? It's not necessary to prevent disease. That's the excuse. We have to do this to prevent disease. Maybe, 2,000 years ago, it had something to do with that. But I even doubt that.
Crazy making business.
Yeah.
So using pain is really efficient, and then the other version is luring you with pleasurableness through commercials. For example, they sell an idea of a self.
It's the stick and the carrot, Ronnie. It's the same old thing that politicians and leaders have done since the beginning of time. I mean, the idea of punishment, for example, is that you deliberately inflict a trauma on someone in order to get a certain desired behavior.
Yes.
Okay. But what happens when, for example, a certain amount of law breaking is desired by the government to give them an excuse for a police force?
For limiting the rights of everyone.
Yes. For example, the creation of a terrorist's enemy or something like this.
They have to have an enemy picture to be able to do all
Yeah,
those
so
things.
you just arrest a bunch of random guys and you put them
Political
someplace.
dissidents.
And you put them someplace like Guantanamo, where they're abused in various ways, traumatized, and then you turn them loose.
Very nice.
Very good. Then you have created an enemy. You have created somebody who has a reason to attack you. And then you can say, oh, we have all these enemies. We need to have surveillance. We need to have this. We need to have that.
And also you leak a couple of pictures to the media so that you show the population we're not afraid to use these kinds of power tools towards anyone, really.
Yeah. So like that's the way it's going in this world. The psychological knowledge or spiritual knowledge is being perverted to the use of power people, power-possessing beings, used to actually create an artificial society where nothing is real. It's all produced in a studio somewhere. All the so-called news, or if it is real, then it's spun in a certain way to give a particular perception to people that are programmed in a certain way by school, by doctors, by vaccines, by so many experiences.
Scientists, media, all above.
It's all part of a huge machine that constructs a world of illusion. And so the world that we know, the world that we think we know anyway, is not only different from the world that is, but it's a world that doesn't really exist except in our minds. And as soon as we get rid of these constructions of I and mine, we see this very clearly. And we see also how ourselves and others are manipulated into thinking that this world is real. But it's actually simply a media creation. It's actually just a psychological programming through deliberate infliction of stress. School, 12 years of stress. And everybody goes through it.
And when they come out all the same.
That's right.
And you can observe this, maybe you can't recognize it in your own group, but if you look at someone from another country or from another group, then it's very, very easy.
I tell you what, no, just
you can see that they're all the same.
Go to Mexico or South America or India or somewhere wild like Borneo or someplace like that.
Everyone's different there.
Go to a place like that for about a year. And then come back to your nice, cozy, safe Western country and take a look around. I guarantee I know exactly what you will see because I went through it myself.
World of robots?
Everybody's the same. They think the same, they dress the same, they eat the same, they act the same, they talk the same, they even look the same. And nobody's allowed to be different. If you're too different, then you get hassled by the police, you get hassled by landlords, you can't get a place to rent, you can't do this, you can't do that. So many barriers are placed in your way. And you don't realize this because you're already conditioned by all those barriers, by all those criteria for behavior and so on.
You're a crab in the basket.
Yes. And if any other crab tries to crawl out, you're conditioned to grab them and haul them back down into the soup again. When you look at the world, try to understand, or even when you look at the mirror, what you see has been taught to you by a very clever system of deliberate psychological and emotional trauma over a long period of time. You are a product of conditioning.
But you need to be brave to recognize that.
Well, that's why we talk about heroism and like that. A person who is heroic enough to go against that conditioning has to be unafraid of the possible consequences. And there will be consequences, guaranteed.
Good and bad.
Yes. But the main consequence that you get by studying the Buddha's teaching is freedom from conditioning.
Yes.
And what you see may not be pleasant. It's kind of scary to see how controlled things are and how people are turned into robots and stuff like that.
But the Buddha's teaching will also give you bravery. It will allow you to see horrible things and not be affected by it, really.
Yeah, and it also gives you a window into what I think I'm going to start calling is unconditioned consciousness. Unconditioned consciousness.
Opening up the set of possibilities to the infinite, really.
Yeah, without any limits, without any boundaries, without any classifications based on words, without an ontology, without a language, without any specific aim except to be, and even to be without any particular form, without any particular time. It's impossible to describe. You can only experience it in meditation.
And it dwarfs any kind of sense perception you can identify with.
Or any kind of sense pleasure. Because it's also unconditioned pleasure. Unconditioned enjoyment.
Yeah.
It probably really, it shouldn't even be called pleasure because it's like a relief from this whole chasing after pleasure and avoiding pain, you know. It's a relief or a release. Buddha describes it as a release from that. Laying down the burden, he calls it. You don't have to create the I and the mine and the self anymore. You don't have to chase after what's pleasant and avoid what's unpleasant, or you don't have to judge what's pleasurable and displeasurable. You're freed from all that work. And you don't even realize that you're doing all that work until you get to give it up.
Yes.
And then you see, oh my God, that was a huge burden. We compare it to a bag of rocks, like a backpack full of rocks. And people have them strapped on permanently, and they're walking around with these backpacks full of rocks, wondering why they're working so hard. Why are they sweating so much? Because you're carrying a bag full of rocks, man.
A bag full of rocks in a maze.
And we want to get you to put down the bag of rocks, step away from the bag of rocks, so we can give you this diamond, the Buddha's teaching.
Yes.
It's not a difficult thing, really, to accept this teaching or understand this teaching.
But it's a conceptual jump.
And that's the difficult part. The difficult part is that it's so different from everything else. We can't really measure the Buddha's teaching in terms of anything else. Some people try to make the Buddha's teaching into a religion. And some people try to make it into a metaphysical system. Or a self-help program. Yeah, or, something other than
we don't want to help the self. We want to dismantle it.
Yeah, right. The Buddha's teaching is bigger than anything you've ever encountered. It will not fit in any of the boxes.
No.
In fact, the Buddha is saying, throw out the box. Burn it down. Get rid of it. It's not going to help you. Just be free.
Yeah.
And that's all right. You can do that. If you need somebody to give you permission, we give you permission, okay? You can let go of that box. You don't need that darn thing.
And there are so many gems on the way to Nibbana also. So many side effects that go way beyond sense enjoyment. It becomes more and more subtle. Joy and happiness, even those become irrelevant after some time.
Well, it's lunchtime. I guess we've said enough for today. I think this is one of our best ones so far. At least I had fun.
I had fun.
Cool. All right. So we'll see you next time and give you some more existential ambiguity.
Oh.